Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Now, in southern Syria, the Druze community, split between pro- and anti-Damascus factions, has long navigated alliances amid local Sunni Arabs and shifting regime forces, all entangled in the remnants of Iran's axis of resistance. Yet, Israel's shifting and evolving policies over the past few months, from its support for religious and ethnic minorities to tentative outreach towards Damascus's new government, have complicated efforts to dismantle Iranian influence via Hezbollah and lingering Assad loyalists. With the drug trade persisting as a survival lifeline amid economic woes, pushing for decentralization, Israel's initial strategies actually inadvertently bolstered former Assad regime elements with ties to Hezbollah. How has this intricate web of local actors and illicit economies shaped Syria's post-Assad landscape? What does Israel's contradictory approaches mean for curbing Iran's proxies, stabilizing the border, and resolving the region's unresolved tensions? Joining us to discuss all of this is Joel Parker from the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and North Africa Studies at Tel Aviv University. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you so much, Anaf. Basically, your question just gave my whole lecture away. You're so detailed and so precise and so correct in all of these, how you set it up. That's literally what I wanted to talk about, is how Israel's policy has been both convoluted and at the same time ad hoc, and has tried to, in a sense, adjust to both changing circumstances and, frankly, a change of heart within, let's say, the mainstream consensus. I mean, when we talk about Israel, first of all, we have to understand there are several different viewpoints. There's, always going to be the extreme right. There's going to be the center, and there's going to be the left of center. And there's going to be, the Defense Department, the establishment kind of viewpoint. And there's going to be, people on the street, and there's going to be academics like me. And we're all kind of in different places. But I will say you're correct that initially so let's just go back and rewind the clock a little bit, and then I'll move up to the present. Back in December, a major change happened in Syria, really a revolution. The revolution came to a sort of a head. In 2011, many Syrian people rose up against rose up in favor of reform initially, but the Arab Spring momentum kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas people began calling for the end of the regime, the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which was inherited from his father, Hafez al-Assad, and essentially goes back to around 1970, with even deeper roots in the Ba'ath Party. And that was it was essentially a one-party dominated rule, kind of a socialist system that was very state-led economy. And one family, and essentially, from most people's point of view, one minority kind of began over time to control things. So that minority, as most people may have heard by now, is the Alawi minority. And they represented about somewhere between 12 to 14% of the population, and were concentrated on the coastal area of Latakia. And that's where the Bashar al-Assad kind of base, the Assad family base came from. And they were gradually put into top positions in the army and the government. And over time, there was a sense among the Sunni Muslim and Arab majority, the sense that this minority was kind of calling the shots. Now, it wasn't totally true in the sense that there was no Sunnis. There were lots of Sunnis actually in the government. Hafez al-Assad was very clever about putting, the foreign minister as a Sunni and this guy as a Sunni. It was almost like a de facto sectarian government where they put Sunnis in this position and the Druze in this position and the Kurds in this position. So they tried to distribute positions to where everybody would be part of the government without actually calling it a sectarian friendly government. So over time, the government itself, the style itself became, increasingly stale and brittle. It was very similar to like an Eastern European style under communism for most of the 70s and 80s, 90s even. There were points in which we thought there would be an opening, in fitah, as they call it in Arabic. So there were points when we thought maybe there was a breakthrough. There were times in the 90s when Hafez al-Assad was negotiating with Israel for a peace deal. That was in the wake of the Oslo Accords. Those were heady times when, Itamar Rabinovich, my own PhD advisor, was at that time the ambassador to the United States from Israel, and he was saying, let's give up the Golan if we have to. Like if it's peace with Syria, that's one of the things they're asking for. Is they're asking for the Golan Heights, which, and I'll pause for a second and just explain, for the general audience that the Israeli-held Golan Heights today was captured in the 1967 war, and then essentially recaptured in the 1973 war. And in 1974, the armistice agreement that was hammered out by, Nixon and Kissinger with the Assad regime, and at that time the Israeli government under Golda Meir has held until recently. But one of the new things is that the Syrian government at that time, they agreed on an armistice line, and there was a demilitarized zone, and it was the UNIFIL UN was there and is still there actually, but the demilitarized zone was kind of a buffer zone between like Syria proper and the Israeli-held Golan Heights. On both sides of the Golan, we call it actually the Syrian Golan and the Israeli Golan. On both sides, you have Druze populations living there. The Druze population didn't actually flee from the Israeli-held side, as most people know, but there were many other groups like Sunni Arabs who actually did flee and became refugees inside Syria. So there was this kind of constant sense that Syria needed to get back the Golan Heights. And in the 90s, Israel had a brief moment, where it was willing to actually give up the Golan Heights. But Hafez al-Assad, under pressure, also interestingly, this is a very interesting point. We'll get back, this is a fascinating point. Hafez al-Assad had a foreign minister, Farouk al-Shara, who actually is the uncle of the transitional president today, Ahmed al-Shara, who was one of the most intensely anti giving up of the Golan Heights. Like, he was telling Hafez al-Assad, in no way, shape, or form should you ever be willing to give Israel back the Golan Heights. Never. Or give Israel the Golan Heights at all. It was actually, he was like, we have to get it back to Syria. And Hafez al-Assad, in a recent biography by Con Coughlin of Bashar al-Assad, noted that, like, in a conversation he had with Bashar al-Assad, said that his father actually said that was one of the things he regretted, was not actually making an agreement with Israel. And in fact, Hafez al-Assad said he would have probably given Israel the Golan Heights if it had been, if he could rewind the clock and do it over, which is kind of funny because today, so I'm kind of jumping around here, but moving forward, so the Syrian civil war, 2011 starts. In 2024, December, Ahmed al-Shara, who was at that time known by the world as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, the head of HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, essentially, from most people's perspective, a terrorist organization that had been fighting the Assad regime. And to make a very long story short, they had roots in al-Qaeda. But they had distanced themselves from al-Qaeda and focused on the war against Bashar al-Assad. So this guy, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, suddenly becomes the man of the hour. He has this amazing 10-day conquest, essentially, but it was almost a bloodless conquest because the Syrian army just gave up. He would come to Aleppo, the army would flee. He came to Hama, Homs. There was some fighting. There was some fighting. Let's not say it wasn't bloodless, but there was very little fighting relative to what you would expect. Observers like myself, with popcorn, were watching and going, okay, this is going to take probably days, if not weeks. He's probably going to lose. He's going to maybe hold on to a small area. No, it just boom, 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 boom. Suddenly, Bashar al-Assad was fleeing to Russia, and Ahmed al-Shara, as we all now know him, was entering in Damascus with basically, people were throwing rose petals at him and congratulating him for sealing the victory for the rebels. The rebel side had won the war. But that's where things kind of got complicated because the Israeli side initially was just shocked, I think. There was not much to say other than, wow. I myself, as someone who was always a bit more partial to the rebels, was I was about elated. I was actually like in tears. I was watching people dancing in the streets, and I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. And I was talking to my Syrian friends, and they were all just like, also like just they couldn't believe it. It was just something so incredible. I try to like pinch myself and remember that this moment happened. The Israeli government was taken by surprise, and Israeli governments typically, no matter who runs them, they don't like to be taken by surprise. And I don't mean just October 7th taken by surprise. I mean just in general, like when something that dramatic happens to a neighboring country and you weren't aware of that it was going to happen, you weren't anticipating it, it just kind of it's like it pulls the rug out from underneath your comfortable chair. And so the Israeli government initially started scrambling for some kind of policy. And so they're thinking like, okay, this HTS, Al Qaeda, and he even had like at one point in his life ties with the guy who was the head of ISIS. So what do we say here? We say that the Israeli government said, okay, well, fine, Bashar al-Assad is gone. We didn't like him that much, actually. But let's try and keep Russia around because Russia is like maybe the adult in the room. And that was going to be tricky because Russia was definitely not friendly to the rebels. And in fact, there was a Washington Post report that came out a week after the success of Ahmed AlShara, saying that Ukrainian intelligence had been helping the HTS group develop drone technology, which is something I think quite interesting. And that shows that there was probably some also Western intelligence involved. We know now that Robert Ford, the former ambassador to Syria, had met with Ahmed AlShara a couple of times before this fantastic coup d'etat, that happened. So there's probably a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we'll find out later what was happening. I saw an Iranian report that was maybe false, but it was saying that the Mossad was even helping. I don't know about that, but I think that there was some awareness among the intelligence agencies of what was going to happen. And I think that Ahmed AlShara passed through some vetting stages, if you want to say that. I mean, nobody got out a drone and just killed him. So, we know if he was really that bad, like probably somebody would have done something. And you can see, so subsequently there was kind of a quick shift. The Germans were among the first country that kind of said like, hey, you know what? We got a whole bunch of Syrian refugees that we wouldn't mind if they went home sooner rather than later. And they were one of the first countries to come and kind of shake Ahmed AlShara's hand or not shake his hand to be perfectly technically clear. But they came and they were like, okay, you know what, this guy, maybe we can talk to him. And in fact, so what happened was Ahmed AlShara turned out to be the guy who could talk the talk way better than anyone thought. Way better than I thought. And I mean, I was pretty optimistic, but I was surprised that he was saying all the right things. He was like hitting every note, I mean, he was definitely like, the singer you want in your band. Like he was the guy who was like doing it. And everything he said, we don't want sectarianism. We don't want anything. We want a new Syria. And he keeps using this word, new Syria, new Syria. And it's a buzzword that a lot of Syrians are buying into, a lot of Western countries are buying into. And Donald Trump, to fast forward until basically like, I think it was May, when Donald Trump came to Saudi Arabia. Was it May? I can't remember. When he did his kind of whole Middle East trip and literally met with Ahmed AlShara in Riyadh, at the kind of, how would you say, arranged marriage set up by Mohammed bin Salman. And and they shook hands. And in fact, it was kind of like a funny kind of thing. Like Donald Trump, I kind of met him, and I don't think he had much personal interaction, but when he did meet him, he was like, wow, this guy, like, he's like, he's sharp. Like he looks good, he sounds good, he's like polite, and he's refreshing, and he's new, and he's like, he seems to be fine with me, like, I don't know. He didn't get fired. It wasn't. So Donald Trump, the opposite, actually. When Donald Trump likes somebody, he hires them. And that's the thing is, Ahmed AlShara essentially got hired by Trump. I mean, Trump is like, all right, you know what? We're dropping sanctions. We're moving on. Ahmed AlShara is the guy. He's going to bring in like, normalization with Israel. He's going to come into the Abraham Accords. And that was the kind of the idea. And Israel, going back to Israel, Israel is left in the dark. Actually, by the way, Trump's tour of the Middle East did not include Israel, and that was something that Israeli press talked about quite a lot. In fact, there were people who noted very specifically that Netanyahu was left in the cold, while Ahmed AlShara, this guy who used to be part of al-Qaeda, was shaking hands with Trump. And that was inside, I think, certain circles, especially maybe in the right wing of the spectrum. People were almost like burning with rage over this fact. But they couldn't like really be angry about it because it's Trump. And Trump is Israel's best friend right now, and has been since he was elected, since his first presidency, and now continues to be considered to be Israel's best ally. America is Israel's best ally, but like the kind of Trump specifically is the best American ally in the American relationship. So I think that there was something kind of a shift that had to happen. It wasn't something that Israel wanted to do, but there was a kind of like a realignment. It was kind of like, almost like a dog on a leash. Like, the dog doesn't necessarily want to go this direction, but eventually if you pull it, it will, okay, I guess we're going this direction. So it'll start going that direction. And that was kind of how Israel was. Initially, they were very skeptical of Ahmed AlShara. I will say there was some warming up to him because of his language and his speech. But the idea was that, okay, well, we'll let Ahmed AlShara stay in power, but we want a weak, decentralized Syria. And I will say this very clearly, I didn't hear from anybody in Israel the idea that we should break up Syria, except for maybe with the respect to the Kurds. There was kind of like a brief moment when there was this idea of maybe Rojava, which is how the Kurds call northeastern Syria. Maybe Rojava should be like its own country, or at least have like a lot of autonomy. But in terms of the other areas of Syria, it wasn't even really thought of that like, the Alawis should have really their own country, or that the Druze should have their own country. I mean, that was just not even like talked about. The idea was that maybe Syria should be like kind of decentralized with some, semi-autonomous zones. And interestingly, Ahmed AlShara was one of the main he poured water on that idea a lot. He said like, listen, no, Syria is going to be centralized. It's going to be, and it always, pretty much was like, so Damascus is the center of Syria. He said, this is how it's going to be. And that's the end of it. Problem is, like, you can say that, but if you have people armed with weapons and they have groups, militias that are very well organized, you can say Syria is united, but it's not really like in the sense of Max Weber's kind of state, like, having a legitimate monopoly of violence over every part of the border. No, Ahmed AlShara doesn't have that. And I think this last few days, we've seen that very clearly. So maybe I'll stop here, and you can ask me if you want like to go in more into like what's happened in the last few days, or whatever question comes up. That's maybe my general point, is that I think there was a major evolution as to how Israel viewed Syria, going from hoping for it to be a decentralized state to realizing it was probably going to be a centralized state, and following the Trump lead in the sense on this.
Well, thank you for that. That was a fantastic breakdown, both for a general audience and also for some of our more in-the-know viewers in our audience. But yeah, no, I was going to ask exactly about that, about some of the events in the past few days, particularly with the skirmishes between Israel and its recent strikes on Damascus over the Druze question. How might this affect the future of potential long-term deals with this new Syria and Israel? And how do you see this affecting any chance, if there ever was one, of Syria joining the Abraham Accords?
Okay, so first of all, the short answer is it's going to slow things down. If but I don't think yet that it's off the rails. I think that, and yesterday there was a point in time in which I actually did think like, okay, we've just blown up the tracks. There's no more tracks. Like the train can't go anywhere. But now I think that it's stuck. The train is stuck, and it will eventually keep going. But let's talk about specifics. That's very vague and jingoistic. Specifically, so what's happening in southern Syria is a bit of a mystery to a lot of observers, because even people I know, and I have contacts like journalists, friends who are in Syria talking to locals, moving around, trying to get as accurate a picture as possible, accurate of a picture as possible, who told me that they felt that most of the Druze in southern Syria were leaning towards allowing the Syrian government to kind of like extend sovereignty. I mean, it's Syria. It's not like a question. You can't say like, well, I don't want Syria to be Syria. But they were kind of like coming around to the idea that the Syrian central government was going to be in control of southern Syria. And that's just, it's a state. So, it's like they weren't like thinking they were going to have their own autonomous state or something. And, these journalists and even locals that I talked to like believed that was inevitable. However, there was at least one group, a faction of Druze that was vehemently opposed to this idea. And this is a group led by this sheikh, or spiritual leader. I mean, it's not necessarily, he's not like a military leader, but a spiritual leader. His name is, a lot of people know him, Sheikh Hikmat al-Hijri. So Sheikh al-Hijri is kind of this guy who has long-time ties with the Assad regime. In fact, there are like lots of rumors that he had ties with Hezbollah and the IRGC. And even this is something I've heard from credible sources, not like just random people, but credible sources say that he's got people in his entourage who are involved in the Captagon drug trade, which was one of the major pillars of the Assad regime towards the end, because it had almost no money, so they were getting all their money from drug running and producing literally pills that were being sold all over the Middle East and even in Europe. And so there's some question as to like what his kind of group is. And some people say that they're comprised of a mixture of criminals, former Assad regime people, and some maybe not so bad people who just didn't want to be part of the new Syrian regime. Okay, so let's maybe give them the benefit of the doubt. And they have some contacts with the Israeli Druze community, especially in the Golan Heights of the Israeli-held Golan Heights, if you want to call it Israeli Golan Heights. And so basically, this is the thing. Analysts were saying, okay, so you have this one rebel group. Everyone else is on board with the state. And I think even people inside, and this is a theory I read today, that people inside Ahmed AlShara's like inner circle advised him that since we had representatives meet with an Israeli representative in Baku and Azerbaijan last week, and there's this kind of like understanding that the state is going to extend its sovereignty into southern Syria. And there was it was actually a misunderstanding, from what I understand, that the Syrian regime thought that the Israelis were giving them the green light to extend security forces into southern Syria. And the second problem was that Ahmed al-Shara was told by his advisors or understood that most of the Druze are actually pro-Syria. They're pro-state. So just send in some people and don't worry, like there's going to be minimal fighting, or whatever, minimal kind of resistance. And the one pocket of resistance, this Sheikh al-Hijri, he's a criminal anyway, so you should fight him and get him, arrest him or whatever. And that'll be that. So there were several miscalculations, and I think also there was a grave miscalculation that I'll explain, at least my perspective. This is something that I've said that actually not many people noticed. The first wave of forces that Ahmed al-Shara sent to Suwaida, which is the main Druze majority town in southern Syria. So basically, Ahmed al-Shara sent this group of jihadi fighters as the first wave to go into Suwaida. And these guys, my theory is that these guys are the most hardcore, and they're also, frankly speaking, this sounds bad, but they're willing to die. They're the believers. And they brought in their dawah, they brought in their trucks with Quranic verses, and they came in and they did kind of they humiliated the Druze. The ones they captured, there were images of them shaving their mustaches, and they were trying to really push them down and make them know that, we're in charge, we're the Sunnis, we're the true religion, you guys are the heretics. And it was just awful. It was awful. I mean, people have exaggerated. It wasn't like a bloodbath. They didn't kill everyone. But there was back and forth shooting. There was firing, and many of this first wave of people, actually, a lot of them were killed. The Druze were the armed Druze were ready for them, and they actually did kill a lot of the first wave of people that came in. The second wave of people that came in were the kind of official army people, and they were much more organized, much less extreme. And they were also probably a little bit less, ready to die. And they, in fact, apologized. They showed videos of themselves apologizing to this local population, saying, "Listen, we're sorry. We didn't actually mean to do crazy stuff to you guys, but it was a little bit too late. It was it was just a mess." And by this time, all the Druze in Israel had already seen what was going on. They knew what was about to happen, and all their worst fears had been confirmed. And they just freaked out. They cut a hole in the fence in Israel and came in to help fight their brothers. And they don't care about this crazy uncle Sheikh al-Hijri, that he's, bad guy. For them, he's their guy. And they definitely sure don't want to see some nutcase, jihadi shaving off his mustache. That's I don't know. It's a lot of, it'd be I don't know. You might, I don't want to use a negative analogy, but maybe you have a criminal relative, but you still don't want them to get beaten up by the KKK or by the neo-Nazis or something. So that's how they viewed it. These guys are bad guys. Even if my friends over here are not such good guys, these guys are worse, and I'm not going to let them kick the butts of my family members. And so that's what I think drove some of the policy that Israel and steps that Israel took. But also, don't forget, Israel has several Druze high-ranking officers, including generals. And there was even one general, Ghassan al-Alian, who's the head of Kogat, the organization responsible for bringing in aid to Gaza. He threatened to quit. He said, I'm quitting. If Israeli tanks are not going into Suwaida, I'm done. I mean, it was like an idle threat, but it was a threat. And he went public with it. I mean, you're a general in an army, you don't go public with stuff like that unless you're really upset. And I think that was the message. And there was actually a member of the Knesset, the parliament here, that went over the border. I mean, ostensibly, he was trying to call back Druze fighters or Druze from the Israeli Golan Heights. He was telling them kind of guys, okay, I understand that you're upset, but let's not do this. We can't just cut through the fence and start fighting on the other side. This is, there's two countries here. We have to respect that. But he was actually also going to give them moral support and saying, but you know what, if you can do something in the next few hours, go for it. It was just a mess. And Israel, I think, so this is the thing that a lot of people don't know. the Israeli army was seeing massive wave of fighters from the regime coming towards the border with Israel. And I saw Etana, which is like a military analyst site. They were saying that there's about 12,000 regime fighters heading to, from east to west towards Israel. 12,000 fighters. And I think that was one of the reasons why Israel went from a few kind of missile, like symbolic, drops of bombs here and there to like suddenly they started like bombing convoys, and they sent this huge bomb that blew up the entire Ministry of Defense building, which was I assume they told, I mean, they did hit it twice before they blew it up, but like, I assume they told everybody to leave it, because I didn't hear from the Syrian side any casualties, which makes me think like Israel must have told them like, get out of there. Still, I mean, it's a very symbolic and huge. It was a huge explosion. I mean, apparently there was like a convoy of diplomats nearby. I mean, it was a big deal, and I think the U.S. was taken by surprise at the veracity of this attack. But I think it had to do with the fact that Israel was suddenly realized there could be a bloodbath here if 12,000 regime fighters end up surrounding or attacking, I don't know, however many Druze fighters. This is going to be a one-on-one fight, and it's going to be a bloodbath. There's going to be possibly thousands dead, and that I think was something that Israel was not. So in a sense, to give Israel the benefit of the doubt, I think that they probably did prevent a worse bloodbath. Though at the time I was very nervous that Israel was going to end up actually doing the opposite.
Now, kind of zooming out a little bit, in the broader context of Israel's fight against Iran's axis of resistance, how do these local dynamics in southern Syria and northern Israel play into the efforts to counter the proxies like Hezbollah?
Well, so I mean, that's an interesting point. I don't know exactly to what extent Hezbollah has like ties inside Syria today. I think that that's one of the major changes that's happened in the last year. Really, is that Hezbollah went from almost having like free reign inside Syria to now not only not having free reign inside Syria, they don't have. I don't think they have very good access to weapons. Obviously, Iran can't send weapons over land to Hezbollah. There probably are ties, but I would say that from what I gather, from the experts I've talked to who are really more knowledgeable than me about like the Captagon trade that still exists, I would say that there's probably a lot of like economic stuff going on, like illicit weapons and drug trade. As far as like actual military action, I don't think Hezbollah. I mean, listen, Hezbollah probably has a reason to do whatever they can to put a thorn in the side of the new regime, but I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I did see a tweet, by the way, from I don't know if it's his grandson. There's a guy in Nasrallah's family, Hadi Nasrallah, on Twitter. He's very popular, but he was hinting that there's something dark about to happen, and he says it might be the end of Syria as we know it. And I mean, I take everything he says with a grain of salt. He's a pro-Hezbollah guy. He's a Lebanese guy. I don't know what he knows about Syria, but from what I could gather, it's possible that Hezbollah will exploit the current situation to try and forge an alliance with especially this al-Hijri group it's very well documented. He had very close ties to Bashar al-Assad and to Hezbollah and other figures. So that's well documented. So if Hezbollah wanted to use this moment to infiltrate that group or to join with that group or to help fight against or even just to escalate the violence to draw Israel into a fight against Ahmed AlShara, any of these scenarios could create a very different dynamic. And in fact, right now, this is again, like you said, by the time this comes out, we could be seeing a different situation. And I'm very worried this could be a very bloody weekend. So That is something I'm very worried about. I don't have any specific intelligence though.
Now, you brought up something there that I was about to get to next here. The Captagon trade in Syria, as I understand, hasn't been fully eradicated under the new Hayat Tahrir al-Sham government. Can you explain first how it became a survival mechanism for many during the Assad era, and why it's still influencing the calls for a more decentralized state?
Sure. I mean that is really like a good question. Captagon is something that was at one point several billion was well, it had several billion dollars worth on the street value. I don't know if it was bringing in literally billions to the regime, but it was bringing in thousands and tens of hundreds of thousands for sure, and maybe even millions of dollars. Well, probably millions of dollars. And and the thing is, like a lot of people were involved in the trade, and that was what made it like maybe great for people because happened was you had government employees who were making like very, very little, and because of inflation and the devaluation of the Syrian lira, their salary was just not worth very much. So let's just say like if they were hired at a certain amount, the devaluation of the lira meant and the inflation meant that like people were getting by with like the equivalent of like $30, $50 a month for an entire family on a government salary. So if a police officer is making $50 a month and they're the breadwinner for their family, like even even assuming that things are cheaper than they are, like let's say in the US or something, you can't really survive. So people were turning to various means of extortion, sometimes even kidnapping, and certainly the Captagon trade. The Captagon trade was seen as like almost like the least evil of the options of kidnapping, murder, outright breaking into someone's house and stealing their stuff. I mean just smuggling a few drugs that you're not actually even taking, like to from one place to another. Like that's not who cares? You're just the mule. So, that was really like the way that a lot of people were making ends meet. Um, and so Ahmed al-Shara, when he came to power, like that was one of the things he said was that I wanted to quadruple the government salaries from day one. That was like his promise. He's like, everyone who's working for the government should make four times as much, a 400% raise. In fact, just last month in June, finally was able to get the finances together to make it a double raise, like 200%. And that was something that, he had initially really, I think from his heart, I think he hoped that he could do, four times as much. But in reality, the Syrian economy is just in shambles, and government employees are still in a dire straits. And because the state hasn't fully extended itself across Syria in an even way, you have areas, pockets of Syria that are really left behind right now, even from government jobs, not to mention like, the private economy. But it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, because if you have the government funding there, you have, better roads, you have better electricity, you have better internet, you have better everything, so you can actually produce things. And if you don't have government support, you end up with like just, literally living in the dark.
Alrighty. Well, we're approaching the end here. Now I'll leave you with this question here. So with so many unresolved elements and ongoing border tensions and things that could very quickly escalate to be very bad situations, plus the Iranian influence, what do you see as the most likely scenarios for resolution in the coming days, months, weeks ahead?
Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead. Actually, I've actually always said for the last 7 months I've tried to be like the optimist. To be honest, I'm not so optimistic. I'm actually quite pessimistic. I feel like that the recent clashes and the fact that the way that the Syrian regime kind of bungled its ostensibly correct move to have Syrian state forces control all of Syria. It just bungled it up and it made it a big mess. And instead of doing it in a professional and clear-headed way, it turned towards the worst kinds of sectarianism, which in turn will spark counter-sectarianism. And we've already seen today on Thursday the 17th of July, reports of Druze retaliations against local Bedouin populations, which is again sparking even more sectarian sentiment in Syria. And what it all does is it weakens the central authority of Ahmed AlShara, who until now has been seen as kind of like the guy who always says the right things and essentially does the right things. So now we're seeing him as the guy who maybe still says the right things, but we know he doesn't always do the right thing. And that is a huge problem, because that was, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian people didn't turn against him because he didn't say the right things. You could read every speech that Bashar al-Assad ever said, and you would probably agree with like 90-something% of it. Like, he just says like good stuff, I want everyone to be healthy. Who doesn't what, you want somebody not to be healthy? Like, everybody wants, sure, we should all be healthy. I mean, like, he says very general things everybody agrees with. So Ahmed AlShara, the fact that he says general things everybody agrees with isn't enough. You've got to do the right thing. And if sectarianism spirals out of control, and you lose control over this militia and this tribal group and that Bedouin group and this, over here and over there, things start really shaking, and it's very difficult to kind of like, to use a very dumb metaphor, to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Once he falls off the wall and he breaks apart, like, what are you going to do? So that's why for the first time in the last 7 months, I'm actually like extremely pessimistic. So I hope I'm wrong. Actually, I prefer to be the optimist.
Well, on that not so positive note there,
Yeah.
we
Pessimism
are
with a smile.
unfortunately, yeah, yes. So on that note, we have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for today. I want to thank you again, Joel, for a fascinating breakdown, overview, and for sharing your insights.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Anaf. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, if they want to follow more of your work and more of your research, is there somewhere where we can direct them, where they can go and follow you?
Well, first of all, I'm on X. You just look for my name, Joel D. Parker, or you can find me at the Diane Center at diane.org. And, hopefully I'll have more stuff coming out in, various places, but I'll probably put that up on X. I'm pretty active there.
All right, sounds good. Now, for those watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I will be sure to put those links in the podcast description below. As always, I thank you all again for your viewership and for your support, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.